Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
Hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Anjali Ranadive with me here today. She's a forensic DNA analyst, attorney, professor, and fitness professional. Welcome to the show, Anjali.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. Before we get into the heart of it, why don't you give us a background on how you got into it?
Sure. So everybody now knows CSI, right?
Yep.
I mean, there's many different versions of it. But back when I was in school, we didn't have CSI. We had Quincy. And if you're under 50, you might not have ever heard of him. But he was the only really forensic flavored show on TV back in the 70s.
Yep.
And I just really was enamored with the whole concept of medical doctor using criminology to try to solve crimes. And it just really got me. I was interested in science, and that seemed like a really interesting way to put my scientific prowess to use as a profession. So all through school, my intention was to go to medical school and become a forensic pathologist or medical examiner. Mm-hmm. I was pre-med. Got a degree in biology and applied to med school, but also knew that there was a chance I wasn't going to get admitted because my grades were not fabulous. So I had the foresight to also apply to master's programs in forensic science. And back in the early 90s, there were very few of those. Now they're all over the place. But,
right. That was a tough time. I remember my wife, for example, is an MD, but she got her master's in chemistry beforehand. She was looking at forensic. One of her friends from school did forensic stuff as well, which she's super excited about. But she was looking at more like PharmD sort of stuff and similar veins, as because she had to try a few times. It's very competitive. It's definitely a hard field.
Yeah. So I did get into one of those programs, and I got a master's degree in forensic science, and luckily landed my first job at a private laboratory in Maryland that just did forensic DNA. So it wasn't like a state lab that did all the things, ballistics and toxicology and whatever. We just did DNA. And this was right when DNA was brand new. And so most state labs,
everyone is freaking out that you could leave a hair behind and all of a sudden you could do something, right? And
most of the state labs at that time, very few state labs had either the funding or just the technology to do their own. So, they would ship out their DNA cases to these handful of private laboratories that were doing DNA. And so I got kind of a crash course in doing DNA testing. And then we also, because we were private, I got to travel all over the country to testify because I wasn't just in a state lab working in one jurisdiction. So I worked in the lab and I got to travel and I got to testify, and I really enjoyed the testimony teaching aspect of it. And so being a nerd.
Before you get into the legal stuff, just as on the technical side, was this like doing different types of labeled probes and PCR?
Yes. Well, it was even before PCR. So the very beginning was, remember the term DNA fingerprinting?
Sure.
That was the very first iteration of DNA testing that we used in crime labs. And so those were probes, hybridizing probes. It took several weeks.
And you're basically cutting things and watching the different chromatography,
You would run chromatography, and you had to do one probe at a time. So it took weeks to get a full complement of data. And it was expensive. You were dealing with radioactivity. It wasn't the safest thing to be doing. It was very laborious, but we were able to get information in cases that prior to then, there was nothing that could be, found out. So,
and then a lot of people didn't trust it too.
Yes. Well, and rightly so. I mean, anytime something new, starts coming into court, it should be challenged. And, even now, there are a lot of different forensic disciplines that have enjoyed sort of a challenge-free tenure that are starting over the last, 10, 20 years have been questioned, and rightly so, because I think the public, people who listen to true crime podcasts probably know this, but the majority of the public don't realize that things like fingerprints have absolutely no scientific basis behind them. It's really a very subjective discipline. And, we think, oh, the fingerprints match, it's him. And there's a lot more to it than that. So,
Okay.
but I was at the lab when PCR became a thing, and started doing PCR testing. And then,
I'm sorry, I said you were talking about how awesome you enjoyed the courtroom and traveling.
Yes. So after a certain amount, I was in the lab for about 8 years, and I kind of hit a crossroads. I decided that I loved what I did, but I couldn't live on it. You didn't get paid a lot.
Was there sort of a ceiling? You had already sort of,
yes,
you were running the lab, and there wasn't much else to do. Okay.
Yeah. And so that was partly why I started teaching group fitness. Number one, just to supplement my income, but also I was in the gym anyway. I was always like I was a fitness consumer. And one of the instructors in a class one day, told me that I would make a great instructor. I was always in the front, that front row crazy person. And it hit me, I'm in graduate school. I'm paying to belong to a gym. I could save that money and actually get paid to do something I'm going to do anyway, sign me up. So when I was still in graduate school, I got certified to become an instructor, and I've never not taught classes on a regular basis. So it's been, this year will make 33 years that I've been teaching group fitness, all different kinds.
Very cool.
So, but I kind of reached a crossroads where I realized that I needed to further my career. And the two options that I really was faced with was either going back for more science training, getting a PhD, because I stopped at the master's, or going to law school because I really enjoyed the testimony part. So I chose to go to law school.
Okay.
Actually left the lab. And right before I made that decision, one of my mentors, one of the PhD level DNA scientists, had left our lab and gone to start the forensics branch of the National Institute of Justice, which is part of the Department of Justice in downtown DC. So she was trying to get me to come work for her. And I told her, no, I'm going to just stop working and I'm going to go to law school. And I will never forget this. She said, it's the government. You can do this during the day and go to law school at night. And so that's what I did. So I worked for the Department of Justice for 5 years and went to law school at night. And when I finished school, I left DOJ and hung out a shingle. And since 2002, I've been self-employed, working, teaching, doing training, and working on criminal cases all over the country, including in the last few years, focusing a lot on post-conviction, wrongfully convicted innocence project type work.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot of fascinating stuff. And I imagine you're sort of leveraging all those different skill sets or expertise in those different things in your practice. Can you tell us a little bit, a snapshot of what you do right now then?
Pretty much, I teach one course as an adjunct at ASU. So at the West Valley campus where their forensics department is, which is fairly new, but I teach a testimony and ethics class for the next generation of forensic scientists, which is very fulfilling.
Is the ASU is out of the different campuses in the Valley, is the downtown one kind of the legal hub?
The law school is downtown.
Okay, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, the law school is downtown. And I presume I don't have any reason to go to the main campus in Tempe, but I'm assuming that's the main majority of the majors. But the West Valley campus has forensics, it has math, it has some business related.
Actually,
majors.
I think they expanded their engineering and business together with the microchip company or something. They have some new directive there.
And they're building more buildings and more dorms, and it's a pretty small campus, but it's growing.
Okay, I was just thinking. I think journalism and law are the ones in the central, right?
I'm not certain.
Okay. But, anyway, all good.
But so I teach one class there. This is the 4th semester, I think, that I've been teaching that. And
You enjoy it?
I do. It's a lot of work, but
well, the first couple times you do it, it is for sure, right?
Right. But it is, this particular class that I teach really is my passion. I authored a book about 10 years ago with a medical examiner colleague, actually, on ethics and forensic science. So we wrote a textbook on ethics, and really calling out inappropriate testimony is one of my focuses that I'm really working with. I mean, mostly as an independent expert, you get hired by the defense because prosecution doesn't need independent experts. They have built-in experts in the state labs, right? If they have a murder case, whoever did the testing at the lab will be their expert. Right. But the defense doesn't have that type of built-in expertise, and they always have to find their own experts, petition the court for money to hire the experts, and then they kind of they take whatever they can get. So even finding reputable, knowledgeable experts can be challenging. Right. So it's been my experience that, sometimes you come up against an expert on the prosecution side and they're fabulous. And, we're in my field, we're supposed to be scientists. So we're all supposed to be neutral, right? And not
go out for coffee afterwards and geek out on it.
You do your thing and then everybody's still friends. But there are definitely some that, and it could be the individual, it could be the laboratory that they work for, it could be their training or lack thereof. But I've come across in the last decade so many cases where what's written in the reports and or what comes out of their mouth in testimony is just not scientifically valid. And I'm actually doing a presentation next week at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences conference. They have an annual conference every year, and I'm doing a workshop with a colleague who's in a similar situation. She's also a recovering DNA analyst and an attorney, and she does consulting. And we're basically just presenting on a series of cases in which we've both been involved and just kind of walking through all of the issues that we came up against, and discussing how in those cases, had the defense not chosen to hire experts, and it didn't have to be us. I mean, obviously we're talking about cases we were personally involved with, but had they failed to hire an expert to challenge what the state was presenting, the outcomes of those cases most certainly would have been different, because the jury would have just heard what they said without any question, without any challenge, and just taken it at face value. And personally, in the cases that I worked on, I feel like if that had been the case and they'd been convictions, they would have turned into post-conviction appeal cases, because I can never tell you whether a particular defendant was guilty or not. None of us know that, right? We weren't there. But I can say that in those cases, had they been convicted based on the evidence that was presented, it would have been a miscarriage of justice. So that's what fuels me to do this work. Right.
Excellent. Very interesting. Very cool. I'm fascinated by this. And yours is the type of class that, I'd like pay or audit just to geek out along and see it all. So that's really interesting stuff. Fun. Thank you. So so that's sort of the teaching side. So how about the business hat in it? You have that separate, right? You still running that in some capacity?
In terms of?
Well, you're a fitness instructor. You're a professor at ASU, but then what's the rest of your time spent on? Sort of
pretty much individual case review. So I do, I do cases from all over the country. And if they, when they go to trial, I will testify. Probably less than 5% actually go to trial. I mean, that's also the nice thing about our justice system, that a lot of the times the attorneys are just hiring an expert really to cover their own, rears. Like they can read the report. They can see, their client's DNA is somewhere it shouldn't be, but they want to make sure that they have somebody with that expertise confirm for them. Yeah, I think you need to have a conversation with your client and either take the plea or, so I do case review independently. And then I'm also contracted as an expert to organization called the Courtroom Center for the Fair Administration of Justice, and they are housed at the Penn Carey School of Law at the University of Pennsylvania in Philly. And they have government grants to assist Innocence Project organizations all over the country. So the cases that I work on personally are current cases, like somebody who is on trial today. And then the cases that I work through the Courtroom Center are people who have been in jail 10, 20, 30 years, who have persisted that they're innocent and been wrongly convicted, and they're going through, wherever they are, they're going through their state conviction integrity unit or Innocence Project organization and trying to get, old evidence retested, or in many cases there was no DNA testing done initially because it was before DNA, or trying to get an appeal. And so we help them identify different items of evidence and write testing plans and write affidavits and, help write briefs for the court to try to get those cases moving forward if possible.
Okay. You did mention the popularity of this field nowadays, which is a testament to how cool, how detailed, how technologically advanced the I think is part of the interest in it. This field is become. Is there a lot of competition in that space now?
Yeah, well, not necessarily in my space, but when I lecture to my students who are now going to be trying to find their very first jobs, I think you hit on something that's interesting. There's so many programs, right? When I was in school, there were 3 or 4 universities that had master's degrees. There was not a single, you couldn't get an undergraduate degree in forensic science. We all got degrees in chemistry or physics or biology, and then we went on and got either a master's or we got on the job training at the lab. Now, there are almost, so many universities realize that it's a cash cow. They start a forensics bachelor's program, but there's really not a lot of uniformity. And when this first started happening, a lot of the crime lab directors started complaining that they were getting applicants for jobs that weren't qualified for, and they claimed that they had these forensics degrees, but they didn't. And so this was back when I was still at Justice.
There's no certification or a governing body that was really.
There is now. There wasn't, but there is now. So when I was at Justice, we started a working group of half of the people on the group were crime lab managers or crime lab directors, and the other half were academics within forensics. And so we put them all in a room and we said, who is your perfect applicant? What do they already know when they apply? And so we created a list of recommendations, which then went into writing of standards for accreditation. So like every university is accredited by the Department of Education. As of today, I don't know if that department still exists, but up until very recently, right, every university had a Department of Education accreditation. We started a subcommittee of the overall forensics professional organization called FEPAC, which is the Forensic Science Education Programs Accreditation Commission.
Nice.
And it is the certifying body that accredits undergraduate and graduate forensic science programs. It's voluntary. Schools are not required to be accredited, but we really did it for the kids that were interested in this field so that they had a way to assess whether the school they were applying to, if they were accredited, then it meant that they met a minimum level of rigor in their curriculum. And so that was sort of the benchmark for recognition by the people who were going to hire these graduates. If you come from a FEPAC accredited school, they know that at least you got testimony training and ethics and, science. I mean, that was the big problem. A lot of these programs were calling themselves forensic science, and there was no science there. It was criminal justice, which is great and is needed, but you can't go work in a forensic toxicology lab if you're taking policy classes. You need instrumentation. You need the nerdy stuff that you and I have.
Right. So the focus it seems to be making sure the programs have qualifying pertinent curricula for the program and a particular level of rigor. But adjacent to that is restricting the number of students for the field in the industry. Is that ever in play? Because for example, I know friend of mine, he's a plumber, and he went to get a med tech degree or degrees because he wanted to switch it up, and he wanted to go do some medical imaging, some position or something. And it turns out the particular institution that was training them in that and giving out those degrees gives out, a couple hundred a year, and there's only like 3 spots in the city, available type of concern. So is that anything you guys, the governing body, looks at?
No, we don't have governance over that, but it is definitely a problem. I mean, when I applied to graduate school, pretty much, if you paid the application fee, you got in, because nobody even knew what forensics was back in the late 80s, right? Or, early 90s. Now,
pioneer.
Yes. Now there's so much competition for jobs. I mean, again, pretty much the schools aren't going to turn any students away because that's income, right? So even in this class that I teach, it's one class. This is the 4th semester I've taught it, and it's a required class if you're a forensics major, and they take it as a senior. So the numbers over the 4 semesters that I've taught keep going up. And it got to a point where I even had a talk with the director of the department and said, at some point, are you going to put a cap on the number of kids that can take the class? And he said, well, no, they have to take the class. It's required. And I said, well, we're teaching law, and the way that I teach law, I don't want to just make you memorize something and do a multiple choice test. You need to write stuff down and show me that you can reason through an argument and that you understand the concepts that, we're trying to teach. And I can't, it's sort of my fun job. And it's, it's not doing it for the money. I'm doing it sort of as my community service to give back to the community or to the discipline. And when there are, so many students, it becomes a challenge to me just to balance my time. And they basically said, we know how many kids we have, how many juniors there are in the department, and how many sophomores. So he said it's only going to keep getting bigger.
Wow.
So,
you're obviously a super achiever, but there's a limit to how many you can do, right?
But I do worry that for all of these students that are, they come into the discipline because they saw CSI, and they, just like me. I mean, I literally got interested in it because of a television show. Okay. But I think some of the TV shows don't, we know that they don't accurately portray what's really happening, right? They glamorize it because it's entertainment. Right. It's not, Dateline. It's a fictional show.
And they give the results in hours and stuff.
Hours, 10 minutes. But there are challenges that then trying to find jobs, there are only so many jobs. So the nice thing is, for the students that get a hard science degree, like what I did, I have an undergraduate degree in biology and then a master's in forensics. You could go work in a med tech lab. You could go work in a research lab. You could go into academia, as an adjunct. So there are other options if they have that science foundation.
Sure.
But if they are in a forensic program, it's because they want to go into a crime lab or they want to go work at a crime scene. And right. Again, I don't think there are as many jobs out there as these programs are producing graduates. Okay. So that's a challenge.
Right. Okay. Before we wrap up, and I have a couple other ending questions. I'd be amiss if I didn't ask you to share maybe one of your more interesting, recent, or favorite cases or jobs you got to partake in.
Well, I will share one that I'm going to talk about next week that has gotten some press lately.
Please.
Yes. So, and we can link for your viewers, if anyone is interested, the article that was just published last week about it. I had a case that was a federal case out of Arkansas, and it was a rape case. And because it was federal, the laboratory that did the initial DNA testing was the FBI. So it wasn't the state of Arkansas lab, it was the FBI. So I was retained by the federal public defender to look at the work and to advise if anything was funky. That's scientific term, funky. And, and help her prepare to do the cross-examination.
Okay.
And there were quite a few things amiss in this case. There were some samples that had been mislabeled that they just ignored. The FBI has a practice. They've done this for as long as I can remember of they kind of work in a assembly line in their laboratory. So like one analyst might open up the evidence and then, notate everything. And then they pass it to someone else who extracts the DNA. And then they pass it to someone else who does the analysis, computer work.
Okay.
So, and that's not how it's handled in most state labs. So that's how they do it. And then if a case goes to court, they have a supervisor come and do the testimony. But that person
who never did any of it,
personal knowledge, right, of what happened. They reviewed everything. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so they were going to do that. They were going to send one person to testify for the work of 4. And I say we when I talk about this a lot, but I have to keep remembering that as scientists, we're neutral. And so I didn't have a stake in the outcome of the case, but I was hired by the defense. So I assisted the defense with filing motions to challenge the evidence being brought in that was in question, and also to challenge having this one analyst testify on behalf of others. And the prosecution pushed back, and they had hearings about these issues, and the judge ruled in favor of the prosecution on all issues. So,
can I ask a question? So, I imagine the FBI has dealt with that sort of objection a lot, and we live in like a case law society, right? So if it's been previously said that is sufficient, then that's kind of how that goes down, right?
So your question is extremely timely. There was a case before the Supreme Court right at when this was happening that actually, coincidentally, is from here. It was called Smith v. Arizona.
Okay.
And it was a case, the basis of the case was a Sixth Amendment issue. And the Sixth Amendment, for anyone who isn't geeky like you and I, is the right of the defendant to confront his accuser. And that in court, that means that when someone is on trial, they have the right to question anyone who is presenting evidence against them. And that issue has been interpreted differently throughout state courts.
Okay.
Does bringing one analyst who is a supervisor to testify about the work of 4 other analysts who are not present, does that satisfy the defendant's Sixth Amendment right? And at the time of this case, the Supreme Court had not ruled yet in Smith v. Arizona. So it was an open question. And so the state judge, or the judge, it was a federal judge, but the judge in Arkansas, ruled that it was fine. She could just come, she could talk about whatever these other people did. Footnote, the Supreme Court has issued the ruling, and they said that it wasn't about my case, right? But it was the same issue. They ruled that having an analyst, a supervisory analyst, testify about others' work violates the defendant's Sixth Amendment right, and that's not okay. So had that ruling come out before our trial, they wouldn't have been able to do it. But it wasn't, we didn't have that ruling yet. Okay. So I was literally in line to board a flight at the airport. And the defense attorney texted me and said, if you haven't gotten on the plane yet, don't. So I stepped out of line and I texted her back and said, the plane's leaving. Are you sure? She said, don't get on the plane. The defendant showed up impaired to court this morning.
Oh boy.
So the judge put him in jail, threw him in jail and is postponing the trial. But we had some pretrial hearings scheduled, and we're going to go ahead with those. We don't need the defendant to be present. So I went home and I waited for her to tell me what was going on. And a couple hours later, she called me and said, out of nowhere, the state offered a very, very attractive plea and the case is over. And our take on that is that the FBI was not used to being challenged. The fact that she filed 3 different motions questioning different aspects, they weren't prepared for that. And I think they realized that they had an expert coming to testify against them that at least seemed to know what they were talking about. And, it wasn't the FBI that had the authority to offer the plea, but that's what happened. And the concerning part of this whole thing is I'm presenting about this case next week.
Okay.
The conference proceedings have been public for about 3 months. And all that anyone, including yourself, if you were to look it up, would be able to see right now is like a 2-paragraph abstract about what this workshop is. But in the abstract, there is a line that says, US v. Arkansas taking on the FBI. And the FBI demanded an audience with the scientific organization and threatened that if they did not censor the workshop, the FBI would boycott, never send anyone from the Bureau to this conference. And we knew this happened several months ago. We knew that happened. What just happened last week is an investigative reporter picked up the story and did a whole expose about the FBI tried to censor this scientific organization. So now it's all out there, and colleagues of mine have posted it on LinkedIn, and I've got, the article is out there. So I get to go next week and still give this presentation in a very, very tense climate. But
Okay.
the take home is just because you're the FBI doesn't mean you're immune to bad protocol.
Well, yeah, if anything, you're held to a higher standard, right?
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah.
So
I can see how the original Arkansas ruling would be like, well, yeah, it's the FBI. Sure. Well, one is good enough. You guys have this dialed in, right?
yes.
Apparently
Right. So that's kind of what I do. I guess I kind of cause trouble sometimes, but for the in the interest of justice.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a reflection question I like to ask people about their careers and stuff. Is there anything you wish you would have known sooner about, building wealth and success earlier in your career?
I mean, I suppose it's very trite, but the field I went into is not. It's you don't make any money. There's no wealth involved. Working at the crime lab, even though it was a private lab, I always had a second job just to make ends meet. And now that I'm in private practice, I'm certainly comfortable, but it's still, you're working for public defenders and you're working for Innocence Project organizations, and it's not. It's not. I'm not making like O.J. Simpson defense kind of money. It's
right.
These are everyday people that have been wronged by the system that deserve, a fair shake and transparent, testimony on both sides to try to hopefully find, making sure that the people who do commit these crimes are punished for them, but also trying to protect people who are wrongfully accused of being,
for sure,
convicted.
Excellent. Yes. Very important work. Thank you very much. You just reminded me of a different question. I see space in it. Shoot. Anyway, it's had it and it's gone again. All right. I'm getting older. Anyway, Anjali, if people would like to learn more or connect with you, what should they do?
I can send you contact information. I have a website that's sort of in flux right now, but I can give you an email address or a phone number. If they
Sure, go ahead if you don't mind.
Right now?
Yeah, if you mind saying it on the recording.
Sure. It's my email is the name of my company, which is Law Forensics, which sounded like a great idea at the time, but now it's really hard. But it's Sci like science, law like law, forensics at AOL.com. That's how long I've been doing this. And I will also send you the link to the article that was published through The Intercept. That's the name of the publication. If anybody wants more information about the FBI case.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. Anjali, It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching and joining us today. We appreciate you, Anjali, sharing your insights into science and forensics and justice. Good stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Inspired by our guests? Visit PhoenixProsperityPodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.